Welcome to the Investigation Game podcast, brought to you by Workman Forensics.
She's a CPA and a CFE who uses her knowledge and experience to help people. She began her forensic career in Colorado's 4th Judicial District Attorney's office as a volunteer. After 2.5 years, they created a paid position for her as an investigative financial analyst. While there, she worked closely with the attorneys in the Economic Crime Division on cases dealing with embezzlement, contractor fraud, and other financial investigations. She also assisted in the prosecution of 2 retail theft rings and with the financial pieces in other types of cases. In 2018, she left the DA's office to open her own forensic accounting firm. Her focus today is about raising fraud awareness, educating about fraud prevention, and helping small business owners that are victims of employee embezzlement. Thank you for joining me today, Robyn.
Yes.
So one of the things I noticed and really loved about your bio when I was putting that the intro together is that you started off in the area of fraud investigation by volunteering at a district attorney's office. So will you tell me more about this? Like, how were you able to volunteer with them? I mean, how did that even come about? And then what did your volunteer work there entail?
Okay. Well, it's actually kind of a long process, and it began back when I was in college in my auditing class. We had a certified fraud examiner come and present, and he talked about all sorts of careers related to fraud fighting and whatnot, and he mentioned forensic accounting. So I decided that's what I wanted to do. So I graduated, and I worked in public accounting, but I really didn't have a lot of forensic experience and whatnot, and the forensic partners told me that I needed to build up my skills. So fast forward several years, I was working in the auditor's office for the city of Colorado Springs, and I attended a presentation put on by the district attorney's office. And at the end of their presentation, they mentioned that, we take volunteers. So I thought, wow, that's something I want to look into. So I looked into it, and I applied, and I got accepted. I had been a CFE since 2011, and so that was in 2012 that I started volunteering. And the district attorney's office, the 4th Judicial District, covers 2 counties, and it's the largest in the state because of that, but it's got the smallest budget in the state. So they use a lot of their volunteers for tasks like filing or putting bank information into spreadsheets and whatnot. So I started by doing that. But because I was a CFE, I was able to do some analysis and answer some questions that the attorneys had, which before, a lot of the volunteers were helpful, but they weren't CFEs, so they didn't know what they're looking for. So it kind of worked into a bigger position because of that. I was able to help answer questions. And actually, the case we'll discuss later on, I was a volunteer at the time because I had, started with the office, and the attorney recognized that, hey, there's some skills that you can help with this case. So that's kind of how that worked out.
That's awesome. Yeah, so my staff and I volunteer with the Tulsa Police Department. They have a financial crimes unit, and people are normally surprised that there's volunteer opportunities at the state level, but they're definitely, I mean, you have experience with that. I have experience with that. The area that I haven't, I had kind of looked into volunteering, but the federal level is a little different. They don't really have volunteer opportunities there, but I think it's a great way to just get to, when I first started volunteering for Tulsa Police Department, I just wanted, I was working my own cases, but I wanted to see more. I knew if I could see more cases, then I could get more efficient. And so, they were more than happy to have my help. So, and now the only cases we do pro bono are those that come through law enforcement, just for lots of reasons. But anyway, plus I think they get, a lot of interesting cases that we wouldn't necessarily get to work when we have to charge a fee. So I think it makes it a little more diverse, especially the case we're going to talk about of yours. So, okay. But before we get into that, how did the volunteer work ultimately turn into a job?
Well, I've been there for 2.5 years, and, I was working full time at the same time. So basically, I worked at the auditor's office and then took my lunch and went over to the DA's office because they're both in downtown Colorado Springs. And a big case had come along. It was another embezzlement case. And they asked me, can you volunteer more? And I said, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm only, one person. I need to eat and sleep and stuff like that.
Right.
So,
Fair.
yeah, so they looked into their budget and they did some moving stuff around. So they made me a investigative financial analyst. So they offered me the position, and I was like, "Well, yes, I want to do this. I like auditing, but I like this more."
Sure.
So I went over and did that because of it. It was a high profile case, and they needed it to move forward a lot faster. It did take a long time to investigate, but that was because most of the time I was a volunteer. But once I was full time, we moved it along.
Yeah, awesome. So you had worked in public accounting prior to this, and then the auditor's office. And so what area did you work in public accounting?
Um, well, in public accounting, I did a little in taxes, and that's why I learned that I do not like taxes. It was a hard thing. A customer threw their tax return at me, and it wasn't, just a little 1040 easy. It was a big file. So I was
Oh
like,
no, were they just
it's not,
mad that they owed money?
yes. And
Oh,
unfortunately, it was a misunderstanding. They hadn't communicated everything they should have, and it worked out in the
oh,
end. But still, I was like, I don't want to be in that position. So I went into auditing. I really enjoyed the investigation, but I really struggled with the issues that regular auditors have: scope and materiality, because I wanted to go down that rabbit hole and figure out why this happened, or I wanted
yep.
to know why somebody is doing it. Not just fix the problem after, but identify the problem so you can fix it.
Yes, I have struggled with the same. I did some work for our state auditor's office because I wanted some audit experience because I had tax experience, but nobody ever threw their tax return at me. So
That's
I hung in there for several years doing tax. But uh, yeah, in working for the state auditor's office, I did. It took me a little while, and I hope auditors listening to this don't get upset with but this is how I had to think about audits so that I wouldn't do that. I had to think about it as a teacher grading a paper instead of someone like a mentor helping someone, uh, and that was really difficult for me. So I did that in addition to workman forensics for about 9 months and said, I'm done. I get it. I get it. Um, so having worked in this field with law enforcement is a really different perspective for like a lot of the fraud investigators we've had on the show. And I feel like that's something that you and I both have in common because I've worked with law enforcement and then also from the private sector. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit. Um, what are some things that you feel like you learned by working with law enforcement that you maybe wouldn't have learned like from, private sector? Do you know?
um, a lot of the investigation skills that go beyond what an auditor does. A lot of interviewing skills. I got to watch other interviews while in the office, and so that was fascinating. They weren't always related to my cases, but I enjoyed that. I enjoyed learning about the process of how something moves through the investigation at the police department or the sheriff's office, and then how it goes to the district attorneys, and then how they prosecute it, and how it moves on through the court system after that. There was there was a lot of interesting people, and mostly it was hard dealing with all the skeptics. Everybody tries to maintain a positive outlook on people, but it's hard sometimes. You don't want to always think the worst of people, but I like to still think the best of people, even though some of the people I worked with didn't.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard because it's like 100% of your sample of the population is doing stuff they shouldn't be doing. So I think it's difficult. I definitely saw that in my experience as well. It was definitely difficult to maintain a positive attitude, or like I don't know. I would kind of wonder, does anybody do this right? Does anybody care about like being a decent human being? And you mentioned that about watching interviews. I've done that at the police department. And yeah, it's usually not about financial crime stuff, but I would just see these interviews going on. And I just have to say, I am always amazed, or when I was there, I was always amazed by just how comfortable the police officers were talking to people who may not even be in their right minds, or are high on something, or something really traumatic had just happened, and they're having to, like, I don't know, the interviews I watched, and they're all recorded at Tulsa at TPD. And so the ones that I watched, it was just really amazing to see they know this terrible thing this person did, but like they treated them with such dignity. That was pretty amazing. I know that maybe not everybody's experience, but I just remember thinking in the interviews, like, wow, that just takes a lot of patience.
Yeah.
And to sit there and go round and round with them.
They're very good at what they do.
Yes, very. And, and like kind of being in that detective office space. A lot of them have done a lot of interview training and getting to watch them, which we don't do that a lot in our practice.
Exactly. Yeah.
We're looking at the numbers.
Yeah.
I don't know about
the
you.
Paper, the data.
Right. So, what do you think are some things that maybe law enforcement could learn from forensic accounting or fraud investigation professionals that might help make their investigation simpler or more efficient, maybe more enjoyable?
I think it would be helpful for them to have access to certain tools to make their lives easier, because they're very good at what they do, but they're usually generalists where they do every kind of case. Even if they do just financial crimes, sometimes they get pulled off on other cases. But by having a tool to like go through the bank statements to OCR or optical character recognize them, the data to put it into a spreadsheet so they can analyze it a lot faster would help them. So maybe the case wouldn't sit so long on the desk where I don't want to touch that, it's huge. But having a tool would help them get through it faster and help it move along in the court system.
Yeah, for sure. Is there a particular tool you use to do that, to OCR, that you'll talk about? If it's proprietary, that's fine. I'll share ours.
Oh
It's
no,
not.
I use OmniPage and BankScan.
Okay.
I discovered BankScan back at when I was at the DA's office. I went to one of the fraud conferences and I learned about all the other companies that offer software like that. And I had done some research and we weren't really able to afford that. So I found another alternative, and that was BankScan. They still weren't able to afford it, but now as my own firm owner, I can use BankScan and I love it.
That's awesome. Yeah. I know that BankScan does work a lot with law enforcement. I know we use it at the state. I don't know about Tulsa Police, but and then at Workman Forensics we use Money Thumb, and I really like Money Thumb. But okay, so question for you. This was not prepared, so I apologize in advance. But for your check pays, have you found anything that helps make that more efficient, entering check payees, or do you still have to do that by hand, or have somebody do that by hand?
Well, BankScan has a derivative called FileScan. I haven't used it yet, but it's something similar to be able to identify the payees on the checks. I don't know how well that works, especially with some of the handwriting I've seen.
Right. That's our problem.
The only thing I've ever found that was really lucky and by accident, well, actually, that wasn't in there either. I was thinking of the DAT files from Wells Fargo. Those are pretty awesome, but those don't include checks either. So actually, the answer would be no. I don't have anything other than trying to read them yourself, and sometimes that's difficult when you have somebody that has really bad handwriting, or you have really poor quality images.
Yeah, for sure. We had a case a couple years ago, and it was a elder exploitation, and the lady was in her 90s. She was like 95 years old, and she still handwrote all of her checks. And so I remember my team, we had several people entering her different accounts, and they're like, we can't read these. But our data processing specialist, who's been with me about 5 years, she could interpret them. So bless her heart, she was tasked with entering all those payees. But I remember those were like really difficult. But I'm still on the lookout. So if anybody listening knows of anything that will help read, I mean, even just like printed checks. I mean, I'll take the okay, fine. Handwriting one's fine. But like something that'll read those the printed checks, that would just save a lot of time. But maybe I'll have to look into BankScan.
Because they offer remote deposit now, a lot of banks. Somehow they're doing it where they can at least figure out the amount when it's typed in and sometimes handwritten. So I don't know. There's something out there that has to be. I would love to know too.
I found a software a few years ago that claimed that they could do that, but then whenever I started asking for pricing, it was like
Oh
$150,000.
wow. Yeah.
I was like, I don't think so, thanks.
Nope.
Yeah, that was just a little much. But are there any other tools or techniques or resources that you use that you think are helpful in your investigations?
Nothing comes to mind.
Do you do a lot of your work in Excel?
I do.
Yeah, that's the go-to. I know.
That was because of my experience in the DA's office. I did everything by hand. Well, sometimes I was lucky and I could get the software to OCR it correctly, but most times it was faster just to hand enter it and then put checks and balances in to make sure I did it right. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Excel is very low cost.
I would live in Excel if I could.
Right, right. So, with your experience, do people ask you the question, because I get this a lot from clients, but do they ask you like, why are white collar cases not prosecuted or a high priority? So, and if they do, what do you tell them?
So I would start by telling them that white collar crimes are never considered a low priority. Sometimes these cases are difficult to prosecute because they involve a high volume of information and it takes time to go through them. It's not like a 2 week, go through and you're done. Sometimes they involve complex accounting and business concepts that are difficult to understand, so the detectives might take a little longer to understand it. Also, an office, either a police department, a sheriff's office, or a district attorney's office, they only have so many resources and they have to allocate them on the cases that make the biggest impact. Now, not meaning that it's biggest dollar amount, but biggest impact. So you might have a contractor fraud case that there's 15 different victims and each one of them lost only $1,000. So really, it's only a $15,000 case, but there's a lot of victims. So this makes a really big impact to prosecute a case like this. And it could be, one case where there's, a high dollar amount, and those are nice too. They like to prosecute those, but they do what they can with what they have. And I have to tell people that, I will do my best with what's provided.
Yeah, it's in my experience as well. I love how you word that it's not that it's not a priority, but you're right, just all of the time delays and in what you explained. And yeah, totally get it. So what about the clients who, um, whenever they discover that employees stealing from them and they just want them arrested and put in jail? What do you tell them?
Well, I have to say that not everybody wants to put them in jail, which is surprising to me because that's my first reaction. Like, send them to jail. Some religious organizations or charities
Yeah.
just want their money back. And so they feel that if you put them in jail, they're not going to pay me. That's not really how it works. And as far as, arresting them and putting them in jail, again, like I said, it's a long process to get through the case. But a criminal case is a little different than civil because they have a different standard. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So they have to make sure all the ducks are in a row for your case before they can send it to jail. And the other complication is that a judge's job is to make the victim whole again. And so by seeing that, making them whole again would make them have their money back. That's what the issue is. So they feel that sending them to jail, well, the defendant can't pay you your money back. So they hesitate to put them in jail because of that. Now, both you and I know that rarely does the defendant have the money to pay the victim back. So that's a hard thing for the victim to wrap their head around. I do tell them that, you can help your case by providing the information in an organized format. That helps save time so the detective doesn't have to go through the the huge box of whatever and try to find whatever. You can pull out key items and maybe offer a timeline of the case. What happened? That will help them understand it and be able to work your cases.
Yeah, and I'm sure that that's where you come into play and create so much value, is helping put that together, and especially since you know what law enforcement's looking for. I know that's been valuable for us too, or for our clients. Yeah. It's funny. Because of this dilemma, the victims want the person who's stolen to pay, and who's stolen from them to pay, and then but then at the same time, if you put them in jail, they can't make money to pay it back. And the whole restitution thing, are you going to get like pennies for the rest of their lives or whatever? And so there's a local nonprofit in Tulsa that is actually for substance abuse and so forth, for men, but they work to work through their addiction and substance abuse issues. And the court will actually sentence them to this if they choose, but they have to self-admit, but still, that way they're not going to prison for substance abuse. Anyway, it's been really helpful. I used to serve on their board. And so it did. I remember a few years ago when I was still serving on the board, I thought, I wonder if there's a way that we could harness this idea for white collar criminals, for those embezzlers, where maybe they can serve their sentence by also working, and then for this nonprofit, and then the proceeds could go back to the victims. I haven't made it very far on that idea, but that's something, just throw that out there. Now, do I think that they would choose to go work instead of going to jail as their sentence? I don't know. But anyway, maybe for a reduced sentence or something, because, at the end of the day, I don't know. I think if you're right, do the victims want them to have a criminal record, or do they want their money back? I don't know. So anyway, I think there's a solution out there for this. I just, haven't really put a whole lot of time to that idea. But all right, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. At Workman Forensics, we're your modern day Sherlock Holmes. The team at Workman Forensics follows patterns to find money through forensic accounting and fraud investigation services. Using our data sleuth process, we build client cases telling the story of what actually happened. This process serves clients in the best way, whether they are going through a divorce, a partnership dispute, an estate and trust dispute, or a fraud investigation. So what is data sleuthing? Well, after serving clients in this best way for 10 years, we are proud of our technological improvements, making our investigations work similar to that of a manufacturing process. By following a consistent investigative and internal process, our team addresses client concerns in a timely, responsive, and thorough manner. But don't worry, clients don't go through this process alone. We believe communication is vital to the success of an engagement, so each client is guided by a highly trained and specialized expert forensic accountant along the way. And because we think data sleuthing is the best way to investigate financial disputes, we work to train other professionals as well through our investigation games, guided interactive workshops, and our Be a Data Sleuth seminars. To learn more about any of these services or trainings, visit our website, workmanforensics.com. In fact, our website is full of resources for anyone looking to learn more about forensic accounting, fraud investigation, or our data sleuth process. This includes blog posts, free Excel downloads, more podcast episodes, and links to our YouTube channel. So if you're looking to get into the investigation industry, or if you've been an investigator for years, we know you'll find something helpful in our free resources. So visit our website, workmanforensics.com. Welcome back to my interview with Robyn Shaw. Robyn, in preparing for this episode, you mentioned that you worked a large case for the DA's office that involved a lot of tracing. So first, do you want to, I want to hear the story. I want you to share the story, but also maybe just for people who have never had to trace a bunch of money, you just kind of want to explain what that concept is.
Sure. Well, this case happened early on in my career at the district attorney's office. It was 2005 through 2013, about June or something like that. It was a retail theft ring, and the case was called Just Computers. And it was the first of its kind in Colorado. We hadn't really dealt with anything that big or a process like this. So it involved 5 defendants, and they actually had to break up the trials because our courtroom wasn't big enough for all 5 defendants and their attorneys and all the paperwork and all that good stuff. So The trials actually happened. 3 of the defendants went to trial in December of 13, and the other 2 were in January of 14, just to get an idea of the time frame. So Just Computers was a repair store that repaired computers, but it wasn't really.
Yeah.
So that was their sign, and that was what they supposedly did. But what it actually was a fence, or they bought stolen property and then sold it. So drug addicts or those needing cash would steal things from stores in the area, some of the big box stores or stores that didn't have very good security. So these people are called boosters. So the boosters would take the stolen items to Just Computers, or they would return the stolen items to the stores and get gift cards because stores were not giving out cash at that time without a receipt. So then the boosters would take these gift cards to Just Computers as well. So Just Computers would buy all these items for cash, and then they would list it on eBay, and then they would take the sale proceeds from those items and move it to their PayPal account. And from PayPal, they would transfer the money to their bank account, and then they would go to the ATMs, withdraw the cash, and the process would go around and around. So when they issued a search warrant for the stores, it was kind of interesting, the store and the homes, they found them stuffed with all these stolen items and gift cards and then shipping labels. One of the defendants actually had been living in the store for some reason, I guess to keep an eye on everything. But they were being so successful that they had nowhere to put everything. They had so much stuff that came out of there. Safeway actually donated a semi-trailer tractor to hold everything.
Oh my God.
And the attorneys had to develop a color coding system to keep track of where everything came from, because it was key in, chain of custody and keeping track of, where it came from and who it went to. They ended up having to have many accounts, PayPal accounts, because there were so many defendants and so much activity. They couldn't just have one guy doing everything. So I try not to jump around, but as I dive into it now, the records, what got me involved in my small part of the case was the tracing, like you said earlier. The detectives and all that, they did a lot of hard work, and they did, investigative interviews and all that good stuff. But I took the records, and then I traced things through. So the records involved, bank records, PayPal records, eBay records, Plastic Jungle Records, which is a online card sales service. It involved UPS labels, U.S. Postal Service labels, and cell phone text messages, which were tons of fun. So in all, there were probably about 40,000 lines of data that I had to go through in those records. So taking the bank records and identifying, actually the bank records would be the ends. So starting with the eBay records, I was able to identify the items from the stores through ID numbers and tags and stuff. And then from eBay would assign a tracking number to it. And if the item was sold, it would also have a ship to address and the name and such. So I was able to trace the labels, either the UPS or the USPS labels, to the items on eBay. So it originated from Just Computers and it was sold on eBay. So the ID number in eBay would go to PayPal. And then I could see the funds and the PayPal, so it tied those two. Now, tying PayPal directly to the bank was a little more tricky, but because I could see that, say there were $10,000 in PayPal sales and they transferred $9,500, I was pretty sure that was the stolen funds because there weren't any legitimate funds going through there.
Right.
And then just seeing the bank records, seeing the money from PayPal come in, and seeing the ATM withdrawals come out. Now, what assisted with this is we had a undercover agent, operative, whatever you want to call him. He had some items that were donated to him by a couple of the stores, and they had serial numbers, and he actually sold them for cash to these guys. And so then I traced those items through. So I saw the shipping label, and I saw where it went, and I saw it being listed in eBay and sold, and then I saw the funds, and it went around. And so it was very helpful to the attorney to be able to prove, what was going on. So these defendants were charged with various things from money laundering to theft to criminal or computer crimes. And then the overall COCA statute, which is similar to the RICO statute, the National Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, but only for Colorado. So they had to meet several of these little charges to meet the big charge. 2 of the 5 defendants actually appealed their convictions under COCA, which is the Colorado version of RICO, which is the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. So they brought it before the Colorado Court of Appeals, and the defendant said that the people failed to establish their design element in money laundering. So the Court of Appeals used my testimony to show that there was money laundering, the tracing of the funds, and how it went through the process.
Okay, so I'm always curious how these cases come to light. How was it discovered that this Just Computers business was a fence, and all of that? Do you know if retailers reported that they had significant theft, or how did it?
Well, it was initially discovered as in an unrelated arrest. Somebody was arrested and they sang like a canary or whatever it was. and they mentioned that, they would sell, I think it was a drug case, they would sell stuff to this Just Computers to get cash to go buy drugs. And so they heard that. So it kind of put their radar up. And then they heard a couple more people once they were arrested talk about this. So they thought we should look into it. So they began looking into it and they realized that, these stolen items are going here. So then they approached the retail establishments. So like a Home Depot didn't know that Safeway was suffering the same problem, or what other big store. And so then they all got together and then they formed a division to actually investigate it. And so they moved forward from there.
Interesting. Yeah, we've had several of these come through Tulsa within the last few years, and I know there's an organization for retail investigators, like loss prevention professionals within, the Best Buy or grocery stores or whatever, or large gas station chains and things like that. So what was were you able to put together a total dollar amount of what was stolen, or the amount that you traced?
It was hard to pinpoint an exact amount on one thing because the funds were flowing in such a circle. But I know that the eBay sales for one of the defendants was, just over 38,000, and then the other one would have been 608,000. Now keep in mind this was 2009 through 2013 because we can only get records going back so far. The gift cards total about $394,000, and those were what was sold on eBay and Plastic Jungle.
Wow. So over $1 million.
Yeah, and literally it was going round and round, and these guys would, I guess, live off the proceeds, but it was funny how it got reinvested so much. Yeah, not exactly reinvested. I mean, I would love to have a total of, what did Store X lose? I mean, I'm sure they have totals, but they wouldn't be able to say this is the total that went to Just Computers.
Right.
So I think it would be really hard to quantify, but it was definitely upwards of $1 million.
And were these guys, you said that they reinvested a lot of the proceeds, which I like that term. I think it's funny. So they were putting the money back in. Were they living any kind of extravagant lifestyle, or were they really just running? I mean, just really putting the money back in and then just living basically. I mean, you said an employee was living in the store, or one of the guys was.
Yeah, two of the defendants were father and son. So they just lived their lives, not extravagant. I mean, they didn't drive fancy cars or anything. This was their business. They had to be there probably 24/7. So somebody had to live there because somebody would come to the back door and that's where the sales would happen. because they wouldn't come in the front door
Yeah.
and all that.
Interesting. So did the two defendants that appealed their cases, did they succeed?
Nope. The convictions were upheld.
That's awesome.
It was awesome because they proved money laundering using this tracing method and how I helped them explain that. So they actually said in the transcript that they found my testimony helpful. So that was good. I'm glad it made a difference.
Yeah, so you did testify on this case?
I did.
Did all 5 defendants go to trial or just a few? Or you
Yep,
said all 5?
All 5 went.
Okay.
Yeah, we had 3 in one and 2 in the others. And so it was 2 trials. It was like repeat.
Yeah.
But it was good.
Yeah. That's really interesting because in a lot of our cases or cases that I've traced, I guess I just haven't traced anything that had to do with like inventory items like that. So that's really interesting, like the way that you trace the shipping label to eBay to PayPal and connected all of those dots.
Yeah, cool. There was another case that I had worked on. It was the second retail theft ring, but this one involved cell phones. These people would drive up and down I-25, which is the main interstate between Denver and Colorado Springs, and they would hit cell phone stores along the interstate, steal them, and then they would sell them on eBay and PayPal. So it was a similar process of tracing everything through. But cell phones have a IMEI number that's unique to the phone, and these fraudsters, if you will, when they would list them on eBay, they listed the last 6 digits of that number. And so I was like, awesome, I could trace this through. It's great.
Yes, so good. Yeah, because connecting those dots for, law enforcement and a DA to prosecute beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, you have to have those items to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt,
It makes it easy for the jury to understand, yeah.
Because I actually was doing I was interviewed on a podcast just yesterday, and we were talking about how accountants and auditors who haven't really had much experience with law enforcement, a lot of times they're very interested in what the general ledger says and what these accounting entries say, but you have to trace it to cash, like show how this individual benefited. And so essentially what you did was, on a very detailed level, this is how we know that these weren't legitimate sales. And so I think that's really important. And to me, that is the definition of tracing, is that you're going to take one item and connect all of these dots, showing how the benefit didn't go to the person who actually owned the product or owned the business.
Well, in addition to that, you have to have the couple items that the attorney or whoever can use to prove it went all the way through. But then you have to be able to summarize everything that went through. So
that's true. And then for money laundering, you have to have specific item tracing usually as well, right? Yeah. So very, very interesting. Great case. So glad you shared it with us. So I really appreciate your time chatting with me today. And if any of our listeners want to connect with you or learn more about your work, what is the best way for them to do so?
Send me an email. I will answer you.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we'll make sure to put that in the show notes so they can connect with you. And you're on LinkedIn. I think I've seen quite a bit of.
I am. I'm very active on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So make sure to follow Robyn on LinkedIn, and that's ROBYN. I love the way you spell that, Robyn Shaw. And so anyway, yeah, this was just so great. Thanks for sharing with us, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you for having me. It was definitely a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to The Investigation Game. For more information on any of the topics brought up on this show, visit workmanforensics.com. If you enjoyed our show, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. You can also connect with us on any social media platform by searching Workman Forensics. If you have any questions or topic ideas, please email us at podcast@workmanforensics.com. Thank you.